Alright, so I recently did a poll on my community tab asking if anyone would like to learn the basics of color grading. Not too many of you responded, but for the majority of those who did, stated that you would be interested in learning the basics of color grading your Air 2S D-Log footage. So this will be the first video in a two-part series of color grading your Air 2S D-Log footage, starting with the in-camera settings. Alright, let's do this. Alright guys, full disclaimer, I am not a colorist, I'm not a professional, but I'm just a hobbyist learning this stuff online, just like you are. I'm doing this video just to get rid of that stigma that color grading is difficult. Now don't get me wrong, the art of color grading, it does take some time to learn and also to master. But with this video is going to be the basics. And with that, as a beginner, getting your settings correct in camera is just as important as the color grading part of it. So in this video, we're going to go over the settings I use in the DJI Air 2S. And in part 2 of this series, we'll get more into the color grading part of it. So if you are new to this channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you know the next time I post a video. So you guys just hold tight and we'll get started. Alright, the winds are starting to pick up a little bit here, so let's get this DJI Air 2S up in the air real quick. To start off with the settings, what you guys need to do is go into your menu, and to start off, the color profile or color format that you want to record in is D-Log. For the purposes of this video, the D-Log profile is a flat log profile which preserves a lot of the data within your video. It preserves the shadows and the highlights, so it'd be easier to manipulate them in post. Now another thing you can do, you can go into your settings, and underneath D-Log there's color display assist. Now you turn that on, or actually I have it off now. And as you see, the colors are flat right now. When you go back in, color display assist, you can turn that on and you can get a preview of what, you know, some of the colors may look like. All right, I usually leave that on. Another tool that'll help you with your exposure is your histogram. And a way to read this graph, as you can see here, to the far left is your shadows, and then to the far right are your highlights. Now in the middle, it's like the midtones. So as I rotate the aircraft around, you can see that graph shifting a little bit. Now your ideal exposure for this, you want to get your graph towards the center, more towards the center. Right now I'm a little bit overexposed, as you can see, so I'll explain that in a minute. Going back into the menu, you also, if you want, you can put on your overexposure warning. So what this is are zebra stripes. As you see these zebra stripes on the screen here, it actually points out the areas of where you are overexposed. Now if I bring down my ISO just a little bit, you see those zebra stripes go away because I'm perfectly exposed right now. Another thing you can do is put on your grid lines and your crosshairs to line up your shots when you're filming. This definitely helps out. Now one important thing that you want to make sure you do is put your white balance in manual. If you put it in auto, your color, or you may get a color shift in your footage as you're moving about in your environment. So just make sure you put that in manual. And if you're not sure what to set your white balance to, here's a trick. I'm going to lower this down to 2800 and I'm going to put it in auto. Now putting it auto the camera sets the white balance of what it thinks is the best. And when you go back into your menu and you set it to manual, as you can see, it's 5600 now. And if you leave it at that, if you leave it in manual, it'll stay locked in. All right, so that's a trick, you know, you can take with you. Now, to get a proper exposure when you're in manual mode, I'm in pro mode right now, and to get a proper exposure, you're gonna have to use your ISO, your shutter speed to achieve that. If you are in auto, of course, when you shift your gimbal or move around about in your environment, your exposure will shift. And this is something that you want to do if you're trying to capture some cinematic footage. So I like leaving it in, I like using pro mode, which is manual mode. And as you can see here, I'm filming in 4K at 24 frames per second. And I have my shutter speed set to 1/, double what my frame rate is. And I have my ISO set to the lowest, which is 100. Based on your lighting environment and based on the filter that you have on there, you could set your ISO a little higher to 200 or maybe 400 just to get an even exposure. However, I don't recommend going over 400 because you can introduce like graininess or noise to your image. Now, one thing you need to keep an eye on while you're in manual mode is your exposure value. Now, you can read that down here underneath your ISO, and you see a 00 next to a MM down here in the right hand corner. That MM stands for metered manual, which is your exposure value. Now, this is a readout of your exposure in the background. Now, since you have it in pro mode, your exposure will not change as you're moving about in your environment, but that value will change just to let you know if you're overexposed or underexposed. My personal preference, I sometimes go underexposed no more than -1, but most of the time I hang around the -0.3 to -0.7. I usually try not to go overexposed any, but if I were to go overexposed by chance, plus 0.3 will be my maximum. Now, all this is important when you're color grading your footage, because if you get your exposure right and your settings right in camera, it'll be less difficult to color grade in post. Also, if your highlights or something is too blown out in post, you will not be able to recover that information and you just pretty much ruin your shot. So right now I'm perfectly exposed at 0.0. The fall colors are out. They're not at their peak just yet in this area, but it is some color out here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and take this out, and I'm going to show you some examples of what I've color graded. And in the next video, we're going to sit down and do some basic color grading. so the wind is starting to pick up a little bit here, so I'm going to try to get one more flight in. But if you enjoyed this video or found it useful, or even both, go ahead and give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and also be sure to look out for the next video, the next installment, which will be the actual color grading of this footage. Once that is released, it'll be right here. But in the meantime, check out this video here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. All right, the wind is starting to pick up a little bit. The wind is starting. Okay. All right, so the wind is starting to pick up here a little bit. So I'm gonna hope. Okay.